Okay, it's 10 o'clock and time to get going. Great to have everybody here. Thank you for showing up. I'm Larry Orman,
I'm Allen Carroll. Good morning.
and this is designing great maps for print and image. This is part of a two-session series. Allen has a follow-up on interactive Thursday afternoon at 4, and there were two prior sessions yesterday. The one thing we would encourage everybody to do is to be able to take the survey and let us know how this went. It's really helpful feedback to get. If you have the Esri app, you can easily do that. It's not very hard. Find our session and you'll see the survey notes. A little bit about us. Both of us come at this from really a non-professional point of view, and we're a little bit proud of that in some ways, because it draws on a lifetime of experience of trying to think how to communicate with people about things that you really think are important to them. And mine begins back in advocacy work with an environmental group up in the Bay Area, Greenbelt Alliance. We used to do a lot of maps with pencil and paper and magic marker, and eventually got hold of GIS in the late 80s and began to do some things. And we realized all the way along that the only way this stuff was going to be powerful wasn't the data or the accuracy, it was whether we could also communicate it well. And that was a really, really strong lesson. I took that in the mid-90s and started another nonprofit, Green Info Network. I've been there 22 years. I was the founder up until 2 years ago and turned it over to another person who's doing a great job, and continue to be a senior fellow there. But the bottom line of all of this is, for me, that if you can't compel somebody to really engage with what you've done, it may not be that well worth doing. And so that's what these presentations are really about.
So I'm Allen Carroll. That's me in the middle. When I was about 4 years old with my grandmother, my brother, and a world map in the background. I remember lying in my bunk bed staring at that map as a kid. And I loved maps. I was a family navigator. I hand drew lots of maps of my neighborhood and imaginary landscapes and things like that. And then I proceeded to go on to a career in environmental affairs and then design and illustration, and it never really sunk through my thick skull that I might actually make a living at maps. It wasn't until after I joined the art department at National Geographic magazine and then started to have stints back and forth to the map division that I realized, gosh, all of a sudden I was a cartographer. So I had no formal, I was a cartographer but an imposter as the chief cartographer at National Geographic. There's no formal training in geography or GIS or cartography, but learned some on the job. But that gave me a sort of school of hard knocks type education and the same kind of slightly subversive attitude that Larry has. Not that the rules of cartography aren't important, but sometimes they tend to focus on trees and kind of miss the forest a little bit. So what happened was about 5 years ago, I was strolling through the map gallery and I came across a very bemused Larry with this sort of scratching his chin, having looked at a bunch of the maps in the gallery. And the quality of the maps has improved a good bit since then. And I don't think we can take credit for that, but it's nice to see. But Larry's saying, these are maps that people are really proud of, and yet they have some really basic problems and issues with them. So fast forward a few months, and we decided to kind of put our money where our mouths were then, and thus these sessions.
So one way of reframing that is a statement like this, which is, we're all inundated with so much stuff these days, and the dire importance we have is to draw out things that are meaningful, that want to engage people from all the choices they have. And so another way of looking at the words is to look at it in maps, and I think it's sort of a contrast between, are we trying to do things like this or are we trying to do things like this? The difference between these two isn't just technique, it's thought, it's conception, it's understanding how to approach the task. So this session is going to cover these 6 things. Feel free to photograph, no problem at all. And we're going to kind of move through it all, hopefully leave some time at the end for some of your questions, and let's get going. So a couple of caveats, I guess, before I dive in too far. This is a focus on GIS-based display maps. Allen covers the interactive thinking, and this is not about how to use Adobe Illustrator or other illustration software. Almost none of what you're going to see on screen is done with anything other than ArcMap or ArcPro. Almost all of it's really ArcMap. There's a huge amount you can do, and I would underscore, it's not all of that technical stuff. It's what you bring to the table that matters most. So a way to kind of imagine how to interpret the words here is that we're not trying to teach you how to know it all, how to do stuff. We're trying to understand how to get you to feel what's right. That'll motivate you to learn in ways that technique alone doesn't do. A more tongue-in-cheek approach is trust your feelings, Luke. Just understand what you're coming from, and you'll do that. So if it isn't how to do, it's really about how to know what to do, and we'll go there. So the organization that I most recently have been part of, Green Info Network, is a 12-person shop. We do work for public interest groups. We're a nonprofit. And we work for probably 80 to 100 groups a year on a whole variety of mapping projects. There's a lot of cool stuff on the website. You can easily browse lots of projects to see things that we've done. We even get involved in cookie mapping. You can actually buy little cutouts of states.
So I think cookie maps are interactive maps. So I think it should be my talk.
Yeah. It was hard to interact with these. They were so beautiful. We did them at a retreat. It was really incredible. Anyway, that's our team, and you're welcome to learn more about us. So, good map design is why we're all here. And I'll start with a little bit of a question. So I'm going to show you something and then take it away pretty quickly. I'm going to ask you to think in your own mind, what stood out for you? What did you see? And we'll get to why we're going to do this in a second, but let's just start off. So here goes. What'd you see? So think about that. What did you retain in that brief moment? Yeah, so I would love to be able to elicit those reactions, but we're probably a little bit large. The point of this is that when we encounter a map, it's usually for the first time. Sometimes it's a repeat viewing, but the most critical audience is that first-time viewer. And at the very beginning of their engagement with your product, it really matters what they see. This map is intended to lead you through certain things, and we'll unpack that as we go along. But just pay attention to what your first instinct is when you see things, because it's very instructive. Now, all of this matters, I think, because one, almost every map we do is designed to communicate to somebody. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that, but what's the point of visualizing something if you're not going to share it? Maybe just for your own benefit, for sure, but that's really kind of a small piece. Doing maps can take a lot of effort. If you look at the stuff in the gallery and just your own work, it's a lot of work to do this stuff. So we need to make sure that work is really paying off. We have to know that maps are really hard for most people to grasp. Most people don't really understand maps very well, so they've got to be good. We know that our professional credibility comes from being regarded as doing good work, and so we need to know how to do better work. And finally, and this may be the most important thing, is these days there is so much competition for our visual attention that we're just swamped. And if we don't stand out with what we're trying to convey in that communication role of a map, then we're just going to get overwhelmed by all the other choices that people have. It's just easy to move on from one sensory input after another if the thing isn't sticky for you. So let's figure out how to really aim to make the best maps we possibly can. Now, in terms of undoing all of those grand words, I'm going to start back with the idea of how visual perception works. And there's a great quote from Stuart Allen, who was the head of the originator of Raven Maps, the rather beautiful state and national and world maps that came out for a long time. But it's really a profound truth, is the first job is you've got to make somebody want to stay looking at it. If the first impression is, okay, I'm done, then you've lost. So really important to do that. The key is obviously what our eyes do. Our eyes are these amazing instruments. When they go to see something, they have to untangle that information to get that meaning, to get the attention span commitment to stay with stuff. Here's an example. How many 3s are in this array? It's hard, but how many 3s are in this array? Not hard at all. You can do it in a glance. How your brain perceives all this information is really worth paying attention to. This is me interpreting out a lot of science studies about this stuff, but basically it comes out of evolution. And we are wired to do certain things with our eyes. Our eyes are wired to respond in ways we can't control in just the first instance of how we encounter something. In this nanosecond of under a second pre-attention span, we have absolutely no control over our eyes. They're going to see whatever they see. And that really even continues up for the first couple seconds. We just respond to things. So it gets really important to know what our eyes respond to. How do we compete for that space of the marketplace, of the visual marketplace? Allen has a strictly evolutionary approach to this. It's really pretty good.
It goes back to our early lives on the African savannah, and if something entered your field of vision, the first thing, the most important thing is that going to eat me, or is it? Do I need to fight it or run away, or is it okay? And so it's that visceral, emotional, sort of primitive brain response that we should pay attention to.
So if you just remember that whenever anybody's going to encounter the product you do, they're going to go through this. This is going to be the structure of their first couple seconds of engagement. After a while, then the cognitive brain can pull in and you can start to get some willfulness involved in the whole process. A visual way to understand this is that in the first second or so, a sheet of paper that has a little bit of design on it might look like this. In the next little bit, the eye would unpack it to recognize these things. And then after a little bit more, it would start to see the actual content of that thing. So that's the experience we want to think about in our maps. Now, this is mediated pretty heavily by our field of vision. And if you have a page-sized product, it's going to be seen differently close up versus far away. If your map is designed to be seen from 2 feet, it's not going to work well from 7 or 8 feet. The same is true if you have a poster. If a poster is in front of you here and you can't see it all close up, it's probably because it was designed to be read from farther away. So it really does matter how that works. All of this is a function of how our eye travels. So we have these instinctive reactions to something, and then when we get into that cognitive state, our eye travels around. And eye tracking exercises are really interesting to read about and understand, because that's kind of how we wander around these pages. Newspaper front pages are often really good frameworks for this, even though there's fewer and fewer of them out there. But they're really designed to be sticky for your eye and to engage you, and it's almost, clickbait kind of stuff. They really want to hold you on the page. So that's kind of just some basics around visual perception. Let's move into the question of communication and design as it applies to mapping. I will start with this question: is map design just cartography? There's a new Carto book down at the Esri store that's thick, and it's fabulous. It is a really outstanding piece of work, and although it's expensive, it's probably worth everybody getting. It's really terrific. But it's largely focused on cartography. And so a visual way of talking about that is this what we're talking about? The depiction of what's on the map and the rules and the procedures that go into it? I would argue no. I would say our job is to think at this scale, to think broadly of the container of everything that communicates about our product, not to be stuck on what's inside the frame of the geography itself. That most people are going to experience the whole, not the specific of the cartography. So that's what we have to think about. And all of which boils down to why we use the word communication and design as the framework for what we're talking about here. 4 elements in communication. First, thinking about audience, understanding your story or your intent, your goal, choosing a format, developing a strategy. Those are sort of process ways of going into thinking about communication. If you imagine your audience, a lot of us would like to have an audience as big as this. This is terrific, and enthusiastic and ready to go. Yes, I love that. It's great. But in fact, our audiences are a little more prosaic in a good way. And this is Allen's formulation, which I really like, is that we probably have to imagine people that are willing to give us a chance, but they've probably got a lot of things to do. They're intelligent, but maybe they're not really clued in about maps. And even though these are Esri UC goers, just average folks who fit what we're trying to do. Now, that could be a very specialized audience that you're trying to appeal to, or it could be a general audience. But getting into the audience that you're trying to prepare for and understanding what they want and want to get from you is really important as an early stage of this communication framework. Allen likes to say that a good way to think about it is imagine your mom and how you would engage with
How do you
your mom.
talk about your work to your mom? You don't use terms like, geodatabase and attribute table and all that kind of stuff. But you treat her with respect. She's no dummy, but you just kind of, you change your context, you change your vocabulary, and you can change your visual vocabulary as well.
So the second thing in this 4-part construct about communication is you need a point. You got to have something you're trying to say. If you don't know what you're trying to say, it's going to be hard to be effective in communicating. Both of us really like this idea of storytelling as a framework for understanding intent. A story has a message, it has a sequence of telling, and it's done with an audience in mind. The genius of what Allen's led at Esri on Story Maps is that it takes this whole concept and it provides this wonderful technology for very direct storytelling in an almost long form kind of way. But we can all adapt those same principles and ideas to display maps, static images. Another way to sort of see this question about storytelling is to imagine that we're going from raw data to a story. Those are really different things. And on the GIS screen, we go from raw data to a story this way. On the left there's not necessarily a point there, but it has to be distilled into something that makes a point. If we do something like this, we're not going to get anything across. There's no way to understand this map without spending a long time. Your brain doesn't want to work hard. Your brain is incredibly lazy. It only wants to do things that are really easy unless you really force it to. And so if people have discretion over what you're showing them, they're not going to want to work hard to understand it. Here's an anecdotal project that Green Info did. A group in the Monterey Peninsula up the coast had a pine forest area that it wanted to highlight, and a consultant had done this map for them. And it obviously wasn't making the point. It wasn't clear on what it was trying to do. And so we spent a lot of time talking with this group who wanted us to work on it, trying to understand what were they trying to say. And they tried a lot of different formulations and often very complex. And we said, no, it's all got to be boiled down. And eventually we got to this statement. What they want to talk about is there's just a little forest left. There was more before. And there's one big opportunity now, because that's the action item. They wanted money for this one conservation project. The result was this. This is in a brochure, so it has some word context around it. But it's the kind of thing where we can actually say a lot, but our point stands up pretty tall in the order of how people perceive stuff. Whereas on the left, it's pretty confusing. It's hard to figure out what to start with. A third approach to how you structure communication is the format. What's the thing that you're going to do? What is it like? Is it a story map? Is it a working poster? Is it a press conference illustration? Is it a page in a 40-page report? All of those choices matter a lot. And then once you've got those things, you can start to get to this question of, well, what's your strategy? how are you going to approach this thing? What's the right thing to do? It's easy to say, well, I'm just going to create a page and drop something on it. But it's worth thinking about what is the thing that can help. So it could be concept ideas that look like this. It could be a bunch of things, but it's a creative leap, and it's really the most exciting part of this whole process. Matching to that question of strategy is this question of goal. You have an intent. What's the goal that you want your user to go through? I think all of us would hope that everybody would go, "Oh, that's great. You got me. Now, what else? Are you trying to adjudicate a zoning issue? Are you trying to inspire me to take an action? Or whatever, this whole spectrum of possibilities." But it's really good to be deliberate about this and to have some sense of how it all works. That strategy depends on whether you expect people to have a quick attention span or a long attention span, and you have to choose. The zoning map on the right side of the slide up there is designed for people to stare at it a long time. It's not designed for people to get a quick bite out of. Now, putting all of this together leads me to one thing that I think boils down everything that I'm really trying to get across, and that's this, is that if you've done a really good job, you've created a story that unfolds in layers of meaning. And I can't underscore how important I've come to see that idea, that the judgment of what you're trying to do has to fit this sort of piece, because we all experience maps in steps of engagement. We don't experience the whole at once. We come to it, we get stuck on it or not, we get a little engaged, we get more engaged, and if the map doesn't fit our sequential engagement with the product, we're not going to hold the audience and we're not going to be successful in how we do stuff.
And of course, Larry, by this, Larry does not mean operational data layers. It's a different kind of layer.
These aren't feature classes.
A visual hierarchy that,
Yes.
that pulls people into the map and delivers a message.
Exactly. So why do this? We are wired. I mean, nobody here is wired differently at this level than anybody else. We are wired to visually go in these sequences of perception, and we need to understand that. If we do it, we get trust out of the engagement that comes from people feeling that, oh, you've given me something that I really feel good about, and I'm going to trust you to keep telling me stuff. That's important. People who can sequence information takeaways can absorb more information from our product. If they have to read it all at once, it's really hard for that stuff to stick. If it comes in bit by bit, gets deeper and deeper, they get more out of it. And it gives people that willingness to come back and look again. So let's go back to this map for a second and think about how this works, these layering concepts work. This is clearly related to the perception slide about the seconds of the brain and all that. But if we think about these 4 steps, the first step might, and look at the time slider down below there just to kind of orient to that. In that first moment, it's kind of like this. And something has to hold us to be able to recognize so that our eyes won't bounce off. In that couple seconds of initial attention, something has to resolve so that the eye can grab onto the pieces a little bit more. And then we get that next stage where there have to be some sticky things when you get in a little bit closer. And as you get in closer still, there has to be things to still hold your attention. So at each step of this 4-step exploration of what the product is, you've got to have little bait pieces that hold on to what people are doing at that level of perception. Now, if you've got a bigger, more complex product, this is a map. It's actually right outside here over by the recording area. It's a 10 by 12 USGS map about all the protected areas of the United States. What do you do about those? Well, that really means you have to have an extra layer here, and that is that the map product has to be able to support a deeper dive, and the cartography really does matter a lot here, because as people get in, there has to be more for them to see. If not, why do anything large? You know, there's really no point to it that way. So if you've done all this well, what happens? How does that feel? Well, if you've got somebody for the first couple seconds, that's good. That's like, yeah, That's great. If you can hold the up to 5 seconds, that's really good. If you've got them to 10 seconds, we're really cooking here. And if you can hold them for 20 seconds, you clearly are one cool dude. And if for some reason you get to that 30-second level, you are just rocking it. So at each step, you have to realize there's a payback that you're going to get or not. And your objective is to get to that minion as fast as you can. So if you've got something that has a lot more levels, there's more complexity in this whole experience. We're not going to get into that. The maps like these tour guides and detailed maps like the Nat Geo map on the left there, or the right, are really, there's a whole different set of steps about perception there. So here you are. You've kind of now figured out how perception works. You got a concept of how to approach the idea of designing something that will communicate well. What's the next step to go through? This is a direct borrow from Allen's notion that you've got a diva on your product and it really wants to stand out. There's a message in your map that really has to come through in your design process. You have to expose that message and let it sing. It's really important to do.
And the page is the stage, so there's a lot you can do with that theater metaphor with the lead actors or divas and secondary actors and how they move and work on the stage.
So it's like going from these pages to the real product. You've got to take those inspirational ideas of what your dream is, and you've got to realize them in a way that works. So to design a map, and this is, there's nothing fancy about this, but these are 6 kind of touchstones that I'm going to talk about to get to maps like this. This map on the right is a really nicely done, simple map, not complicated, but it stands out well because it followed a pretty clear process. We often think of design process in GIS as this. It's the screen, it's the desktop screen that we use, and that's our design tool. Both of us, I think, would encourage thinking differently. Designers might think, well, you start with all these structured steps and you go through, and if you've got the luxury to do that, it's terrific. More often than not, it's really going to be this. You're going to have an iterative process, and if you only have a straight line arrow to start and finish, you probably will have lower chances of success than if you have any way of iterating your thinking about design. And it could you just even be once or twice. You don't have to do too much to make this process work. The best tool for this that I think both of us would align with is the idea of sketch concepts. And Allen in particular has been a real big proponent of that in thinking about all this stuff.
Real high-tech stuff like pencil and paper and a marker and whiteboard. Probably the best ways to go early on.
Getting away from the computer screen is really important for trying to kind of reapproach what your design process is for getting to a product. It's real easy to get trapped inside your software boundaries to get to something like this. So if we have a concept and we can sketch, how do we know how to lay stuff out? And that's where understanding composition and thinking about the traditional design rules of rule of thirds and negative space and thinking about eye-flow movement. All of these things we could spend a whole session on, and we should all pay attention to cultivating them in our own abilities. They're really important. If you take a really nice product like this and you say, well, how did this come to be? Well, clearly there's a balance within the overall product. It's using negative space well, it's keeping things in proportion. Our eyes really resonate to stuff like that. This is another one where a layout grid has been used really effectively. Layout grids are your best friend in good design. And going from a sketch to a layout grid is a really good 2-step sequence. Grids really help our eyes become trustful of what they're going to see because we don't have to fight too much to figure out what relates to something else. White space is also part of that. Don't be afraid to have a lot of white space and let it use to create some tension and some balance inside of something.
And oceans don't have to always be blue. Sometimes white is better. A lot of times white's better.
I think there's a more modern technique in the last couple of years where taking away lots of color is a good thing and really paring down. So in layout, I want to just show you this and watch carefully because it's pretty subtle. But this is not a bad map, nothing wrong with this. But it just has a couple minor things that don't work well. And the first one is this. So you see that? In back, it's probably hard. There's a legend. It's too close. It's lined up next to the map object. There's no breathing space. Oh, I don't feel the tension anymore. I mean, I'm serious. It really, people get to that point where it's like, oh, I see, okay. So just minor stuff like that can work. The logo down below is too big. It fills the space too much. It wants to be smaller. Okay, we did those two little things. Minor, but now it's a more restful, engaging product. Branding is another really key piece, and it's easy to have a chaotic look to lots of map products for a particular client or organization. Branding can really help, again, give people that sense of what to expect. This was a map that we did of the San Diego River watershed here for a local foundation. Just technically they wanted to see what was where, and we then said, well, let's make it yours, because this isn't yours, that's not theirs, that's just the map. And making it theirs was easy, just a couple branding bars, using their logo, trying to basically bring a color framework that felt like them. And that obviously can be extended to the map cartography itself as you do it. But simple stuff, this was 10 minutes of work to make a map that now was theirs, they could identify with. Cartography. Cartography is very important in a successful product. Don't get me wrong about that at all. And there's some really creative things you can do to make cartography come out a little more strongly than it might otherwise do. Census maps are a really good example. This is your basic block group map of San Francisco, and it shows demography by ethnic group. And it's okay, but if you just did a couple things differently in your cartographic thinking to try to create this layering experience, you could come out with something like this. What we've done here is take the building footprints in San Francisco and cookie cutter all the census geometry, and then we got rid of all the places that people didn't live. Now, your eye can stay with this. It gets the big message, okay, there's sort of strong colors here and there and everywhere, and it holds you to go in much further. You can spend 30 or 40 seconds or a minute looking at this map now, whereas if you were looking at this, you'd be done after 5 or 10 seconds.
I love this because in some ways the second map is more complex than the first, but it's got some grit and texture that kind of helps your eye kind of latch onto it, and it also feels urban. The other could, those could be polygons of anything. It could be fields, or rice paddies or something. Here, it's a city. It's a gritty, cool city.
For people-oriented things, one of the great tools is impervious surface data. You can get this nationally, and you can basically use it as a surrogate for building footprints. And it really is quite an effective technique.
What was that called?
Impervious surface data. You'll find it, I think it's USGS data. But you have to rank it as to how much imperviousness you want to use to represent the developed area. But it's a good surrogate if you don't have anything specific. Design in cartography should always support the story. It shouldn't just be that we have to show everything because that's what the data was. It's no, pull it away, show only the stuff that's important. I would argue that you also want to, as you think about cartography, be a little careful with contrast. A lot of maps can be very effective in a soft, subtle kind of way, and especially if they allow some highlights to really stand out to be that diva. But bringing black into the mix, and Alan and I have slightly different perspectives about this, on paper maps, black can be really demanding. So see this? Look at the title, Canyonlands up in the upper part. Now I do it in black. It's very insistent, and it's very kind of pushy. It wants to be seen. If that's the objective, it's great. But if all those labels were in black, it would take away from your experience of all that soft, subtle landscape shading and make it harder to see the whole picture. So contrast is a key thing to work out. Labels are also fundamentally important. Having a good label hierarchy is a really important design step, and that can be done away from the GIS screen. You can just do it in anything you want, but basically figuring out what's going to be what size, what's going to be what font, what's going to be what color, what typographic treatment can really make something work, as opposed to just dropping stuff all in one font or all at the same size. Again, you're trying to create this varied story, and not all the labels are that important.
Typography could be a whole separate talk, the use of different fonts and italic for natural features and size and color, etc. This is where the details really can make a big difference.
So at the end of the day, hello? Alan?
Freeze up.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to update. Sorry about this.
Thank you, Steve Jobs.
Good.
Sorry. So at the end of the
Is it
day,
working?
no, it's still.
Oh, man.
Maybe go out of presentation. This
Yeah.
commercial is brought to you by Apple Computer.
Now I think it's gone away. Let's hope it doesn't come back.
Out, damn spot. There we go. Okay. So there are a lot of good rules for cartography that are worth following, but really don't be a slave to them. They are there to be broken to serve your purpose. They're not to be followed slavishly. And the result of all this design thinking is that, if it doesn't really feel good to you, then what the mind thinks is going to have a hard time getting over that. And you want to do stuff that really feels engaging, and that's your bottom line, not that you followed X rule or Y rule. So let's take a turn into some fun little comparisons here. This is the GIS edition of Extreme Makeover, where we go from meh to yes. So here's our watershed, our Ventura River watershed. This was a map designed to show slope and aspect. And I would suspect that most of us would see the two objects that are closest to flat before we see the slope, the lake and the flatlands. So there's a lot of other ways we could have done this, and it could look like this. This is a green info redo of that map, where we've done a couple things. We've cleared away all of the information that visually competes with the center watershed area. All that tan area is now this light color, very soft hillshade. We've gotten the legend out of the way, so it's not taking up all that eyeball space. And we've made the map stand out to the thing it's supposed to talk about, slope and aspect. Those are the things that come up in front of you. The water is pushed back. The branding is brought in for the agency in a nice way on the bottom frame. Same place, this is water pollution areas. The hillshade outside the selected region is really bright and very demanding of your eye, and it just doesn't need to be there. It's not a bad map, but it could be so much better by, again, clearing out the stuff that competes for the basic attention. This is a really big saturated map, and it doesn't happen too often these days, but default Esri colors can lead you into great difficulty. And
Sorry.
And so you really have to, be careful with them. This is in a report. It's a nicely designed report, a multi-page report. But just by doing a little bit of desaturation, just nothing more than just desaturating a little bit, we now get a map that is not quite so competitive with its environment. It fits in better. If we actually redo the map and the layout, we get a much better product that is playing well with the page instead of this. Using saturation as a great tool is one of Alan's good tricks, I know.
This is a big deal for me. So a lot of us think about color in terms of hue, whether it's red, yellow, green, or value, whether it's light and dark. But then there's the third, which is saturation. Is it really bright green, or is it a soft mossy green? Is it a more of a gray green? Saturation is, I think, the sort of the cartographer's secret weapon, or desaturation is rather. It can be a really powerful technique.
Here's another comparison. This is an area on the California coast that had a little trail map like this. And again, just rethinking it gives you a different product. It's just imagining something different. Somebody imagined the first one, you can imagine it differently. This particular triptych is a really nice map. This is a great map of a terrible subject. This is all the tree mortality in the California Sierra mountain range. And it's not quite right because it's doing a couple things. It's repetitive. The title repeats that there's 3 years. The title kind of fights with the map to kind of be noticed. And if we just redid things a little bit by moving the title up in the bar and getting the legend layout a little bit differently and getting the credits all out of the way, now we have a map that lets the map stand up and say, hey, this is me. You don't need to know that it's tree mortality from 14, 15, and 16 because you've already labeled it. It's already there. It's good to go. The next one is kind of my favorite horror story of a land trust that had a conservation campaign, and they wanted to illustrate what the lands are they wanted. And again, this is something where somebody with good intentions said, I have to have everything on the map. Everything's got to be there. And so nothing's there. And in the revisiting of it that we did, we basically said, let's pull some framing into the picture so that the map sits on the stage, if you will. And then let's redo the cartography. And again, let the thing that matters most stand up. There's more data once you bore in on the map, but it really speaks better than the other one did. This is another project, not so dramatic, but important with USDA. These are invasive pest issues and all. And this map is not bad, but it's got so much little detail distracting you from the big picture that if we just redid it with a little better framing and got rid of all those county outlines because they're really unimportant, and now instead of this, we have something that really lets you see the message. How do we know if a design is good? I like the 3-second test. Hold something up. What'd you see? Take it away. See what they said. That's something you could do with any product, with any other, your cube mates or anybody who is around you. You can have formal critiques. You can learn to pay attention to your own work over time. What did you do 2 years ago? What are you doing now? You can compare yours to others. You can scrapbook other people's stuff. I think it's a great idea to just actively scrapbook anything you can from that's great, just to build your own sense of what feels good. If you get resistance to your designs, there's some things you can try. You can sort of say, well, let's compare this to that. Let's get others involved. You can also use leading questions to sort of soften resistance to your design by asking, well, what about this? Is there a better way to do that? There are ways of kind of holding that back. Let's take a quick run through these design pitfalls. And again, some of this will be repetitive of the stuff before, so I'm going to jump through pretty fast here. Undefined messages are the biggest enemy of maps because they lead to muddled thinking. This is a map of tobacco outlets near schools, but really it's a map of parks. If you redo it, you can actually make that point in the map. If you throw everything at once, if there's no hierarchy of understanding, that's a bad thing. If you use passive titles, you can really get a lot of user engagement by using active titles in maps, not boring things like blah blah. And this title on the right isn't terribly exciting, but it's a whole lot more interesting than the one on the left. Or disorganized grids, especially conference posters, are the bane of so many complex map projects. Poor color choices. This is the worst color choice ever. It's using one of the old default hillshade ramps that are just awful, and then combining it with a content map that is trying to do the same thing. But also, just very glary colors can just get in the way of how we understand stuff. There's a lot of lines on this map, right? So here's somebody's, they had 20 rules of cartography. Glue readers in with neat lines. And no, do not do that. Neat lines are probably the most overused cartographic technique out there, and they just get in the way of things feeling coherent. This is a map that has just about everything wrong. but especially confusing font hierarchies. I mentioned before having label systems. This fonts are in wild profusion in different approaches all over it, and unnecessarily so. Element size relationships. The most important thing on this map, obviously, is the NOAA logo, right? And then the scale bar, which, by the way, when it comes to things like north arrows, you really don't want to use north arrows very often. If your map is tilted, great, use a north arrow, but you don't really need a north arrow. Again, to reiterate, it's not hard to improve something like this. We can take that map and we can say, okay, what would be better? Well, let's just kind of revisit that map, and we're going to clean up the north arrow, get it out of there, use their real colored logo, which is a blue, put a nice panel to organize the legend in, reorganize the way it lays out a little bit, get the credits out of the way, and now, instead of this, we've just got a cleaner map.
Although I'm not quite sure why that outer boundary is so darn heavy.
Yeah, we couldn't change that. I would have changed the cartography. I actually had the map. This was me grabbing somebody else's map and just trying to show that. You're exactly right. But at the end of the day, it's just all a way of saying that good design really matters. It's really, really important, and we need to learn how to be better. So what to remember here? First off, surprise, surprise, maps are stories that unfold in layers of perception. It's really an important thing to dwell on and to think about that. It means you've got to have priority messages. You've got to really know what you're trying to say. It means you're seeing those messages through your audience's eyes. It means you're using your visual skills to run that eye all around the map. And then to do that, you're going to have to take a lot of stuff off. You really need less, not more. You always do better with less than more.
The cartographer's disease is one of just wanting to add stuff, and the cure for that disease is to take it off. And that's hard sometimes.
It's true that you can take it off by pushing it back in the visual layering. You can really soften stuff up and say, well, it's on the map. I can't see it. Oh, yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay. And you just get it out of the way. But in general, it's better to follow Allen's guidance on that. So if you want more about my organization, Green Info, you're welcome to go browse these things. And we're now open for discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.